North Dakota. My dumbass thought North Dakota was mine to conquer. I had this bright idea that I could push myself to the farthest limit and attempt to ride nonstop across the entire state. It's only 330 miles wide, but considering I had only ridden 120 miles in one day, with sleep and adequate food, this may or may not have been overly ambitious on my part. My thinking behind such a task was, well, North Dakota only has like 3 habitable towns, and I might as well pass through them as fast as possible, skip out on the turmoil of being in a desolate wasteland longer than I want to be. The North Dakota Endurance Challenge. It all started in the cool college town of Grand Forks. I didn't have any preconceived ideas about the state, except that it's one of the least populated places in the U.S. I was able to line up a host home in Grand Forks. They allowed me to spend 2 nights in their home so I could rest for this dumb journey I wanted to embark on. Chris and his wife were in their 30s, had 3 boys, and were both teachers. They chose education as a profession intentionally so they could take the summers off to spend with the kids and go on adventures. I thought the most remarkable thing was that they took family bike tours together on rail trails. Their whole family had been hosted several times using the same hosting app I used, and they continued to give back to the biking community by helping people like me have a safe spot to crash. They were also artists and musicians, so we had much to discuss. One of my contacts back home lined up a bike shop willing to help me with some new bike components and a tune-up. I got a pair of new tires, a new chain, and even a new sprocket. My bike was in rough shape as far as shifting goes. I don't know how it got paid for. They just told me it was taken care of and that I should not worry about it. I spent most of the day hanging out with the mechanic, Dave, while he worked on my bike. He was a burly guy with an unhealthy passion for bicycles. He told me how the only bike tour he had done was across the entirety of Australia. Talk about one of the most desolate places on Earth. I had nothing better to do than be at the bike shop, so I enjoyed my time there. It reminded me of visiting skate shops as a kid. You would go to buy some new equipment, but stick around to talk shop with the employee or watch skateboard videos. After my bike was finished, I went back to Chris's in the late afternoon and kicked it with the family before dinner. Dave texted me and invited me to go over to his place and have some beers later, so I did just that. He worked at a brewery part-time and was well-versed in beer styles. When I arrived, Dave poured me a beer and gave me a tour of his house. He had hundreds of bikes that he collected and fixed up to sell. His entire garage and basement looked like a bike recyclery. It was glorious and gave me a glimpse into the genius of this Renaissance man. On my last night, Chris brought the whole family into the garage where I was preparing my bike for the long ride ahead. We took a photo together and appreciated our shared spirit of adventure and curiosity. I was very thankful for the hospitality they showed me for 2 nights. My friend Ben saw my post on Facebook about Grand Forks, and he told me that he would be driving through town at 3 a.m. He was on a trip to build several skate parks in western Montana. How serendipitous. I told him that was perfect because I planned to leave at 3 a.m. to start my endurance challenge. Ben is a skateboard friend I know, and he was living in Portland at the time. In 2015, he and our friend Rod all biked the Katy Rail Trail to St. Louis together. We've had some adventures. I had run into him several times in random states over the years due to his traveling job. I made an entire loaf of peanut butter sandwiches around 9 p.m. and went immediately to bed. At 3:30 a.m., I loaded my bike and bags into Ben's truck bed. As I lifted my bike, I noticed my back tire was completely flat. We still loaded it up and headed to IHOP for breakfast. We missed the highway exit and made a U-turn to drive against traffic back to the exit. The GPS told us 17 miles till the next turnaround, and we didn't have time for that nonsense. We enjoyed our biscuits and gravy, fixed my tire, and I gave Ben a big hug. I told him I hope he's out here riding with me next time. With those tender moments in my memory, I set off on the biggest mistake I've ever made. 4:45 a.m. riding west on US 2 before dawn. The beginning of the day was mellow riding. There was not a lot of traffic that early in the morning, and the sunrise was gorgeous. 10 miles in, I met a fellow cyclist who rode up from behind me on a road bike. His name was Mike, and he was a firefighter at the local Air Force base. He rode his bike 40 miles round trip to the base daily and had a son who raced BMX. He was charismatic and seemed excited about what he had going on in life. We only chatted for about 15 minutes before he took his exit for work. I needed his energy to get me through the rest of the day. Soon after, I ran into closed road lanes due to construction. It's hard to gauge how far these construction zones will last. Especially on a bicycle, it seems like an eternity. There was hardly any shoulder on the right lane, and I almost got swiped by a couple of idiots pulling trailers. My saving grace was the left lane closed off from the construction. I swerved behind the orange cones and figured I could ride this closed lane until I saw the actual construction. They hadn't even dug into the asphalt yet, and I rode without traffic for nearly 20 miles. This put me in good spirits. Dave told me about a unique North Dakota treat called a caramel roll. It was a cinnamon roll, but with caramel frosting instead of sugar icing. He had boasted that a hotel in Lakota, North Dakota, had the best in the country and that I needed to get there early, so they didn't run out. When I was an hour from Lakota, I called the restaurant and explained to them that I wanted to try this famous roll. I asked if they could save me one. The kind man on the phone laughed at the fact I thought they had the best, but he obliged and ordered the kitchen to wrap one up for me when I arrived. At the 60-mile mark, I found the restaurant, and the front desk attendant knew precisely who I was. I sat at the bar and enjoyed a roll and green tea. The caramel roll was everything Dave made it out to be, so I congratulated myself on a successful break at 10 a.m. I had created a strict diet regimen to stay energized during this tumultuous day of riding. I ate a peanut butter sandwich every hour and a Cliff Bar every 2 hours. I saw nothing but emptiness for the next 30 miles and pedaled into Devil's Lake for lunch. After a century of riding, I was ready for some real food. I stopped at a Dairy Queen and realized I hadn't eaten at one since Texas. There were a couple of cops in front of me in line, and they politely let me cut ahead of them. I was about to order a chicken strips basket when I spied the Kansas City pulled pork sandwich on the menu. I laughed out loud and took a picture of it while the cashier looked at me weirdly. I explained to her that I was from Kansas City and got a kick out of fast food joints, thinking they have Kansas City-style items. I probably seemed like a pretentious creep. I spent only 20 minutes there before hitting the road again. After lunch, I saw nothing but grain elevators and endless prairie. It was depressing. You would think that after living in Kansas, I might have gained an appreciation for the prairie. But I was mostly numb. I found myself falling asleep while riding and realized the 5 hours of sleep I got last night were not cutting it for this endurance challenge. I was making better time than I expected and decided to find a place for a quick nap. I found this giant water tower off the road and decided it would be a cozy spot away from cars. I wiped out under the hazy, overcast sky for about an hour and felt recharged. I woke up to rain clouds settling in the sky. I was still kind of tired and could only daydream about the next time I would sit down for a snack. After 30 minutes, the rain started coming down. It wasn't a hard rain, but the drops were humongous. I was getting soaked and had to put my jacket on. Thankfully, in 25 miles, I could stop for food in the town of Rugby. I huffed and puffed my way to North America's geographical center. I found a little cafe and sat down for coffee and dinner 30 minutes before they closed for the night. 150 miles. I was feeling good about riding into the night and fully charged to kill another 60 miles to the town of Minot. I went outside to unlock my bike and found my back tire flat once again. I threw my bike on the ground and searched for the culprit. A tiny half-inch staple somehow pierced my brand new reinforced flat protection tire. I couldn't believe it. After I finished cursing the sky, I gathered my tools to switch in a new tube. Tire levers, check. Tube, check. Air pump. Where's my air pump? I tore my bag apart and couldn't find my pump. The scenario I landed on was that I probably left it in the IHOP parking lot where I fixed the flat hastily at 4 a.m. I was now stuck in the middle of nowhere, North Dakota, with no way to air up my flat tire. I went to the Family Dollar next door and figured they'd have a pump, but no luck. The problem was that my tubes used a Presta valve, the skinnier road bike style. Most air pumps only have a Schrader valve, which is the standard BMX bike and car tire valve. I started this trip with a couple of adapters, but conveniently, they were also missing. I was humbled that even as many preparations I could make, it still did not save me this time. I was pretty bummed and trying to make alternate plans, as I had to admit to myself I would not be able to ride North Dakota in one continuous go. There was a bike shop in Minot that I was already planning to visit. I knew they could help me in the morning if only I could get there. While I was sitting around and thinking on the curb of Family Dollar, a sweet older lady wearing a sweatshirt came over and talked to me. She was friendly and asked what was going on. Unfortunately, she could not help me with my tire. After an hour of moping on the curb, an employee I met earlier offered to drive me to Minot. His name was Chris, and he was a husky fellow driving a Chevy Suburban. He was a little younger than me and had lived in North Dakota and Washington his whole life. He was married with a couple of kids and mentioned that he loved reading travel blogs and seeing pictures of people like me doing big journeys. He gained inspiration from seeing people doing brave things like traveling. He didn't think he would ever do any adventurous traveling himself. I told him there's always a way if you put your mind to it, and that I thought he had the right personality to be successful in whatever he pursued. At the risk of sounding too much like a Hallmark card, I believed he had spirit. We got to Minot, and I bought a new pump from Walmart. I had him drop me off at a Super 8 and figured I could get a good night's rest while avoiding the storm rolling in. He helped bring my stuff inside, and we immediately noticed the hotel room looked super retro. It had glowing orange lights, soft pastel walls, and a brown tuft-looking carpet. It seemed like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. I loved it. I gave Chris my info and told him to give me a shout sometime, but he wouldn't let me give him any money for gas. He felt it an honor to help me and wished me luck for the rest of my adventure. I was thankful and hoped the best for him and his family. I showered and jumped into bed to pass out since it was midnight at this point. I had been awake for 21 hours and rode my bicycle for about 18. Getting to Minot was by no means the easy part of riding through North Dakota. I wouldn't continue on my nonstop attempt, but I would still barge through the state as hard as I could. I woke up at 8 a.m. feeling like I was hit by a car and decided this trip wasn't going to get any easier. I hit the continental breakfast and replaced my tube first thing in the morning. Once I checked out of the motel, I met the local bike shop owner, Rory. He was a short, stocky man and couldn't be nicer. He explained how the bike shop had been open since the 60s, and he's pretty much seen every touring bike setup ever. He said he met a guy who rode over the mountains on a 3-speed Huffy and couldn't believe that kind of bike would survive. I got there shortly after they opened, and the mechanics were already hard at work. We talked about bikes for a while, and he asked how everything was going on my trip. Our conversation was refreshing because he didn't treat me like a hero or some superhuman. He had seen enough people riding bikes thousands of miles that he didn't need to be impressed. He just wanted to make sure cyclists were taken care of when they had the guts to embark on these journeys. He hooked me up with tubes and adapters, and I rode out of town hoping to find the Montana state line. Not even 20 minutes onto the highway, I saw black clouds rolling in and felt the wind starting to swirl violently. I heard thunder and soon after saw the lightning. I had nowhere to hide. I was fully vulnerable to Mother Nature in this vast prairie. The thunder clapped so loudly that I jumped off my seat. I put on my jacket as giant wet bulbs dripped from the sky. I was climbing rolling hills and only hoping I could avoid a lightning strike. I clenched my handlebars for dear life and trusted that I would make it out of this. Rory told me if I felt my arm or beard hair rising up, I should dive to the ground immediately. I was hyper-focused and terrified until the storm passed. Thankfully, there wasn't a lot of traffic, but the brutal winds were causing me to ride about 7 miles an hour. I accepted that a lot of things could go wrong at that moment, but I knew the only thing I had control of was continuing forward 1 foot at a time. Once the storm dissipated, that's when the residual wind started. Thankfully, it turned out to be a 20-mile-an-hour tailwind. One rule in bike touring is when you have a tailwind, push as hard as you can for as long as possible. It might change directions at any moment. North Dakota had proven to me its weather was about as temperamental as a newborn baby. The rest of the day was a desolate wasteland. I checked out mentally and grabbed a coffee at one of the 2 gas stations in this 100-mile span. Unfortunately, the latter half of the day gave me rolling hills again, and I was slothing my way through the prairie. I was in direct sunlight most of the day, and the temperature peaked into the 90s all afternoon. These conditions were beginning to rival the desert. At 4 p.m., I grabbed pizza and a Powerade at the second gas station, which might be the most expensive convenience store I've ever visited. We were in oil country, and all these tiny towns would price gouge to take advantage of oil workers. Gentrification is a hell of a drug. I felt I deserved a break and sat beside an ice machine where there was a sliver of shade. As I was about to take a bite, I heard a sizzling sound coming from my bike. I looked over my shoulder and realized it's coming from my front tire. I watched my tire in real time deflate itself, and I couldn't believe it. The timing was impeccable. I got my bike on the ground to inspect the wheel for debris and saw nothing that could have punctured it. I decided to take it apart and inspect further. I found that the tube had somehow twisted itself up inside, so the rubber failed and blew tiny holes in itself. In the moment that I came out of the store, I kicked and screamed at the sky while I installed a new tube. The combination of exhaustion and adversity will really frame apathy in a person. When I hit the road again, all I found was burning heat and a brutal headwind. I climbed the first hill away from the gas station and felt tension constricting my front wheel. I stopped and realized my front brake was rubbing on the rim. I couldn't fix it by just moving the wire around like usual. I inspected it for a few minutes and realized the front fender was in a position that was constricting the pull of the brake pads. One side was rubbing while the other pulled away. Adjusting the fender required me to take my whole front rack apart, which is time-consuming and difficult. I decided to disconnect my front brakes and ride without them until I found a time to investigate the issue. Right now was neither the time nor the place for extensive repairs. The combination of wind and hills completely consumed all the energy I had left. At 7 p.m., I was ready to call it a day after 90 miles. I wouldn't make it to the next town without falling over tonight. I started searching for a potential place to camp. I would need a barrier to avoid being blown over by the mighty wind. As I scanned the prairie, I noticed large bales of hay rolled onto the side of the road. I'd seen them for miles before considering it a potential camp spot. I found 2 6-foot-tall bales right next to each other, near a fence line, and there was a perfect amount of room for my tent between them. Great. I rolled off the highway and down a hill to set up camp right there. I was worn out and needed to lie down and close my eyes. I was happy for a decently safe spot and hoping a farmer didn't show up pointing a shotgun in my face. It's the simple things in life. I knew I had set out to blaze the trail of the north as fast as possible, but it was already feeling like the desert again. All that loneliness was returning, and I craved human interaction to survive. I was numb and mindlessly pushing myself across this inhabitable land. As hopeful as things seemed when I met kind strangers, I still struggled to stay positive. I felt hypersensitive to moments rather than to days or hours. I was riding longer days, hotter weather, and more desolate stretches. I still had half the country left to conquer and needed to stay focused to not lose my mind out there. I found the fresh mountain air of Montana circling in my thoughts. I woke up the next morning before sunrise and walked my bike back up the hill to the highway. I felt rested after 10 hours of sleep and was ready to crest the hills of North Dakota and cross the flat Montana state line today. The weather was a tad chilly, but I felt comfortable as I was tearing down my tent. I didn't feel the need to wear my jacket or gloves, but Once I was going fast downhill, I realized I had greatly underestimated the wind chill. It felt like 35 degrees. I still hadn't fixed my front brake and was going too fast to be able to stop and get my gloves or jacket out. I just clenched my teeth and did my best to endure the frigidity. That first 25 miles into Ray, North Dakota was difficult. The hilly roads, the cold, and the relentless wind. I needed coffee and hot food to shed this zombie form I had acquired. I made it to town around 9 a.m. and started scoping out the scene. There was a large residential area on the east side of town, but no businesses. There were 2 gas stations, but no restaurants. One gas station was closed and completely run down, leaving me with one option, the Conoco. Thankfully, this place had a decent selection of snacks. They even had New York brand seltzer water. I'd been craving seltzer for a couple days and realized it's hard to come up on the stuff in North Dakota. I got water, coffee, and took a giddy peek at their hot food offerings. One of the employees asked if I wanted anything specific. I was surprised since I presumed you couldn't get items made to order. She said they had breakfast burritos, and I told her she spoke my love language. Bacon, potatoes, cheese, gravy. Fuck me up, you carb-loaded goddess. That was one of the best gas station food experiences I've ever had. This quick respite with a hearty hot meal and some human interaction helped me melt off the cold blood in my heart. I was gaining ground towards the town of Williston. It was only 35 miles away, and I lusted after restaurant food the entire ride. Williston was a booming oil town that had transformed from nothing into a bustling economy of workers flooding in to pump the dirt and frack the groundwater. Capitalism at its finest. I saw billboards for the first time in 500 miles, which finally meant civilization. The first thing that caught my eye was Fuddruckers. Their sign hailed free Wi-Fi, and I knew anything I ordered there would be a feast. I hadn't had phone service since I left Grand Forks and was stoked to catch up on emails and messages. I got a barbecue bacon burger and a tall glass of Dr. Pepper. Finally, reaching nirvana. The waitress had a hunch I was neither an oil worker nor a random tourist, so she asked what my deal was. I tried to explain how I hadn't seen civilization since Grand Forks. Being in a Fuddruckers was like a paradise at the end of a mirage. She seemed impressed that I'd made it this far, but I wasn't trying to make myself a celebrity. She started telling all the other tables what I was doing, and I got a lot of puzzled looks. It felt like a middle school cafeteria. I did a Facebook Live update and probably looked like a crazy person vlogging in the middle of this restaurant. Still, lunch was a glorious trophy for surviving the prairie. For now. I was ready to leave this desolate state and find Montana quickly. The US 2 was under construction, and I had to detour around the town to return to the highway. Lucky for me, the detour was against the wind and completely uphill. I found the highway to make a hard western turn into my, hopefully, happier future. I passed quite a few signs advertising tribal reservations and national parks. They were all south of me, and I didn't care. My brain was frazzled, and you could almost compare my state of mind to that of the old pioneers blazing the Oregon Trail. I was hell-bent on moving west. I was not interested in detours that would stray me from my straight and narrow path toward Washington. Those last 18 miles towards the state line were slow moving. It took me close to 3 hours due to the wind and hills. I could have gone faster if I was on all fours pulling a wagon of bandits. I arrived at the border of Montana and stared at the sky in joy. The sun was shining, and I found strength in my legs again and hope in my heart. On the border of Montana lay 2 casinos. They completely dwarfed the "Welcome to Montana" signage, and you probably wouldn't have even realized you had changed states by the vast landscape. I took a quick gander into the distance and couldn't see anything in any direction. It seemed eastern Montana wouldn't offer much more than North Dakota. The mileage sign for Montana read Mile 666. In hindsight, I may have been overzealous in attempting to ride the entire state. Still, I needed to be humbled by the experience. I got lonelier and lonelier during these long stretches between seeing friends. I should have given myself some grace, but miles are the only thing that will get me closer to civilization. The northern tier is desolate and can kill your spirit faster than the desert. This bike ride was starting to seem stupid, but I had to commit and keep going. Getting out of bed felt harder, physically and mentally. Yet somehow, I appreciated the simplicity of it all. My responsibilities were only to pack my equipment and pedal forward. The expanse of the West is so incomprehensible. I can only take it day by day without overwhelming myself. If I can daydream about getting to Glacier National Park, I'll survive. Maybe.